Leading up to the interview that Piers Morgan conducted with you, I think it was safe to say that there was some kind of an uptrend in terms of Piers Morgan and how the Muslims generally viewed him. He did, to be fair, cover more of the Palestinian topic uh, than other mainstream media outlets. And some could say he was somewhat fair in it, and obviously that's debatable. And I would like your opinion on that, inshallah, as the interview goes on. But once we got to his interview with you, I think he really showed a very unfortunate side of himself. So I want to start by asking, how did you feel going into the interview? And were you kind of blindsided by his change in direction?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Um, I don't think I was blindsided. I knew I was going into a hostile and challenging environment. You got to understand, Piers Morgan's show on Talk TV is a part of a corporate media. That corporate media overwhelmingly will side with the Western viewpoint on occupied Palestine. So they'll be very pro Zionist. They'll be minimize the harms to the Palestinians. Piers Morgan himself, on repeated programs, he's starting the timeline from the 7th of October, and he emphasizes the events of the 7th of October to dominate every interview that he does. So I knew that was the kind of environment. In fact, just a week or so beforehand, he'd had a guest on Niall Ferguson, Professor Niall Ferguson, who's based in the USA, who's from the UK originally, a historian, very much kind of on the neocon end of the spectrum. He's, if you don't know already, he's Mr. Ayan Hirsi Ali. Okay, that gives you some idea of Niall Ferguson's political views towards Islam. And when he was on Piers Morgan's show, Piers Morgan said to him, "Oh, one reason I got you on this evening was I just knew I could let you talk and I'd agree with most of what you say." So his own personal viewpoint is one which I know is going to be hostile to my viewpoint. So I know I'm not going into a friendly interview. I don't think I was blindsided when he went onto the personal stuff. I was not surprised. Perhaps I was a bit surprised by the fact that he really wouldn't let me get an answer out when it came to some of those things. And then he starts putting words into my mouth. I don't think I'd seen any of his interviews which were remotely as hostile as that with anyone else. And
Yeah.
in fact, by the end of it, um, and I didn't notice this as much when I was in the studio as when I was watching it on camera afterwards. The intense, I would say, hatred in his face
Yeah.
kind of looked like he was suppressing far more than he actually said. And he said a lot. His mask really slipped. And I think when he ended it with this criticism of women who embrace Islam, women in the West who embrace Islam, I think the entire Muslim audience that he had actually kind of turned against him after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we saw in the following interviews he had with some other Muslims like Dilly Hussain, I think Abdullah Andalusi as well. A lot of that came out, and he couldn't help himself, but to double down and kind of dig that grave a little bit deeper. And I think what stood out to me the most was the underlying tones that he had throughout the whole interview, because to the common ear, and I'm just thinking about this from like the common just general non-Muslim perspective, to the common ear, and Piers Morgan knows this, which is why he did it. He hears things like jihad, he hears things like Sharia law in the UK, feminist filth, LGBTQ filth, and he just knows what people are going to think, and that allows him to ask these loaded questions. And I think clearly you were actually capable and ready to respond to those questions. And I think when he caught a glimpse of that, he started to cut you off. So at what point, or was there a point in the interview where you realized that this isn't really much of an interview and more sort of an interrogation?
Yeah, it was the point when the first part of the interview, he asked me about this protest in London where somebody had shouted jihad from the sidelines. And I went through what the protest was about. And it was a call to armies from Muslim countries to intervene militarily. And I think this is quite a strong point that nobody, it was one of the reasons I went on the show, actually, knowing it's a hostile show, because he takes many other viewpoints. But look, I'm saying if this is any other theater of conflict in the world, people where a civilian population of more than 2 million is being slaughtered to this level, people around the world will be calling for a NATO military intervention or a United States military intervention or a United Nations military intervention. Obviously, we don't want any of those kind of military interventions in Gaza. But the idea that you would be having no-fly zones, or you would be calling for a regime change in Tel Aviv, would not sound unusual in any other context.
Yeah.
Whereas for the Palestinian people, how come that's not on the table? And how come we as Muslims, who actually believe in the idea that professional armies should be there to rescue people in this sort of situation, can't say that? That's what I wanted to say. That's one of the reasons I went on. Then he moved on to a statement that he'd heard me say, taken out of context. It's been used against me in the media here quite a lot in the preceding weeks to this interview. So I talked about the reaction to the 7th of October, and I was framing what my comments were in terms of the fact that the Palestinian people, the people of Gaza, imprisoned for 16 years in a siege, they can't leave and come. They are reliant on aid. Their children are malnourished. Their water is not clean. And, they're literally an hour and a half from a Masjid al-Aqsa. They can't even go there. But they see the violations and the attacks going on at Aqsa regularly. The fact that they break out of their prison cage on the 7th of October is a very welcome thing. It's an act of defiance. It's an act of resistance. And I would say we know as Muslims, and I think I managed to say this if anyone heard it, we know as Muslims that Sharia does not allow in conflict to target women, children, elderly, or mutilate. And so where such things happen, we won't condone those things. But when I make my comments that this is a punch on the nose for the occupier, that's what I'm talking about. It's about the resistance. So when I wanted to explain the comment that he played, I started off by saying, look, I'm going to be frank, and I'm trying to be concise as I can be, but I want you to hear me out so that you hear all of what I've just said to you. Okay. And he said, okay. And then there's a very funny clip going around where somebody puts a timer on this, I think. And they within seconds, he cuts me off and doesn't let me finish. And then it's a series of interruptions thereafter. So I'm dealing with those, I think. I'm addressing them. And that's about another 5 minutes of the interview. So we're kind of halfway through. And I guess I must, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and all the help that he gave me that day, I guess that I must have held my own up to that point, because he then starts changing the whole direction of the discussion to very personal attacks or other quotes from other people that I'm expected to defend without having seen them or read them or knowing their context. There's a lot of hypocrisy there. While I was sitting in the green room before going on air, he is talking about a UK politician called Nigel Farage, and Piers himself is referring to him as a snake. Okay, this guy's referring to a UK politician as a snake in those kind of terms. And then he's bringing me a quote where somebody is talking about political ideologies being pushed into the Muslim world and describing them as filth. I don't use those kind of words, but there's a rank hypocrisy there, if you see what I mean, that he can mind somebody criticizing a political ideology like that, whereas he's talking about other human beings, like in terms of being snakes and stuff. So he kind of wants to bring it onto the distraction story. We're talking about Palestine and Gaza, which is what I was actually invited to talk about.
Wow.
And he's now going to spend and this is actually documented in an email that they sent us inviting us on. And then he actually changed the subject to the agenda of what I would call the Western establishment, which is to talk more about extremism and anti-Semitism and these kind of things, rather than the mass slaughter that's going on in front of our eyes.
Wow.
So I wish actually I had exposed that a bit more frankly. You're in a studio, it's difficult. If I had been sharper, I would have said, well, you know what? You've just distracted your audience onto a completely different subject. That would have been the right thing to say to him on
Yeah.
that day. But you're caught between two things, which is one, being a political interviewee where you don't want to get caught into traps,
Yeah.
and two, being a Muslim who prides themselves on being frank and being honest and being open. And actually, uh, one of our signs of integrity is actually if you are more open and you say what you think rather than fudge the answer.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to balance these two things actually for all of us.
Absolutely. And I think nowadays it's very clear, like the public general stance on the matter. It's not like, I don't think he realizes it's not the same as it was 10 years ago for him. He doesn't get to just bring anyone on, badger them, interrogate them, try and make them look bad and get away with it. Now people are realizing his tactics and his strategy to try and make Muslims look bad. And as someone who prides himself on like defending the Iraqi people against Iraqi invasion and all this stuff, he uses the same kind of talking points that the people who justified it used to dehumanize the Muslims to allow such an atrocity to occur. And he played on those tropes and those stereotypes a lot in his interview with you. Um,
Yeah.
but please go on in the story.
Yeah, so I think that's right, and he does. I mean, he's made his reputation by for this show. I mean, you're a younger man than me, but actually, when you see global conflicts, I've actually seen quite a few media brands make themselves in global conflicts. So the Iraq War, 1991, CNN was not really known around the world then, but we were at the advent of satellite media in the world and 24/7 news coverage in the world. So for those of us living around the world that newly had access to satellite media, suddenly we had 24/7 coverage of a war in the Middle East, and we'd never had anything like that. And the CNN brand was basically born internationally.
Wow.
A similar thing happened for Al Jazeera in the war in Afghanistan in 2001 and then Iraq in 2003. By then, the CNN brand was not seen by most of us around the world as something which was just giving news coverage in an independent way. Rather, we could see it for what it was. So having a different focus on it from Al Jazeera was a refreshing thing for not just Muslims around the world. I'd say other people that were looking for a more independent viewpoint from the Western corporate establishment viewpoint. And I think Piers has seen this opportunity in this conflict for him because he's covering the war in Gaza, the war on Gaza, I should say, and he's bringing on a variety of voices. He's not treating them equally. So before we give him too much credit, he does not treat the pro-Zionist voices the same as he treats the pro-Palestinian voices. So again, one of the comical things that actually made me laugh during the interview was when he asked me if I would condemn something. Yeah, because we've all become so used to Piers Morgan. Do you condemn? Do you condemn?
Yeah.
For the people from the pro-Palestinian side, and you never hear it from the other side. You literally, he puts a question to them. He hears their answer. If there's something controversial, he really doesn't push back on it. He doesn't bring other things they've said. So the Israeli ambassador to London, Zippy Hotevli, she's been on the record of calling for Israel to exist from the river to the sea, right? Totally.
Wow.
In 2015, when she was a Likud minister, nobody brings that up.
Yeah.
One of his guests who regularly comes on is Douglas Murray, self-confessed neocon, who recently wrote an article in the Jewish Chronicle, which Jews themselves were outraged at, because Douglas Murray was basically saying the Palestinian fighters who kill Israelis enjoy and delight in that killing in a way that the SS Nazis did not enjoy killing Jews in World War II.
Wow.
And it was a bizarre argument where he almost looks like somebody who's making excuses for the SS, even though he's pro-Israel. He's self-confessed Zionist, supporting the occupation of Palestine. So Piers never picks him up on that stuff. And So you've got this imbalance anyway. But, and this is one of the reasons I went on, he is one of the only shows that is giving scope to the pro-Palestinian side, the alternative side. And he may be giving them a hard time, but sometimes some of his guests manage to get their points through. And probably Bassam Youssef is the most prominent example of that. So his first 15-minute contribution was so curveballed that it kind of stymied Piers Morgan, because he was using satirical humor, and I don't think Piers Morgan knew what to do. It almost forced him into a situation where he invited him on as a one-to-one. And I think that guy managed to get through a lot of very important facts and arguments in that 1 hour interview. And he was given the space to do that. But that was almost unique. I think everybody else who went on was given a much harder time. No one got my treatment. And I think that was because he had decided beforehand how he was going to play it. And I think that backfired on him, alhamdulillah. I've had a lot of non-Muslims even reach out to me to say, really bizarrely, 2 weeks ago, I went shopping with my wife in our local town center. And some young guy who's walking 2 dogs, both of which look like wolves. I mean, they're not like small dogs. They're like big, big dogs that look like wolves. And he's got a bunch of piercings around his mouth and stuff. And he walked past us, and then he doubled back and came up with these big 2 dogs. And he said, oh, by the way, I saw you on Piers Morgan and you really held your own well. And mashallah, I was thinking, this is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he helped that day to carry a message to a lot of people. And I cannot be held responsible for that. The good, when we say anything good from this is from Allah, we believe that. And the proof of it is that, alhamdulillah, the Muslims it resonated with the Muslims, but it resonated with a lot of fair-minded, decent people out there as well, who are not Muslim, who are not invested in this in the way that we are. So I'm rambling a bit, but I knew going into this it would be hard. I knew going into this there wouldn't be space to say things as I'd like to, but I knew the opportunities were there, and I made my salatul istikhara and dua afterwards to if it's good, if it's worth doing, oh Allah, then please facilitate it and make it easy. And if it's not, keep me away from it. And there were plenty of opportunities. I never pushed it with them. They were always coming to me. And to the point, by the way, they came back to me 3 days later after the show. One of his production team came back to me 3 days after the show and said, our editor is wondering whether or not you'd like to come on for a less confrontational interview.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh
And I laughed and I said, I don't think that would be hard to get a less confrontational interview. But I said, you frankly, you didn't do what you said on Monday, which was to talk about Palestine and Gaza and the demonstrations. You then on Tuesday had a show without me, which was all about me. And it seems to me now you're looking for some editorial balance, so that people can't say you were biased on Monday. So you can argue, oh, well, we invited him back later in the week and he didn't come on. Is that basically what you're saying? The second thing is the hosts overwhelmingly will come with their own baggage. Now, Piers has done quite well to hide his up till now. He's kind of seen as middle of the road. He's giving the Palestinians a voice. He was anti-Iraq war, but he's a more complex figure than that. He's pro war in Afghanistan. He's, his defense of the Israeli strategy in Gaza is terrible. It is terrible. He underplays what has happened. So, and the third thing you need to know about him is he's after views. He's after ratings. It's a commercial show. He needs advertising. And he said that. He got Brother Muhammad Hijab on and was criticized for it. And when he was criticized, he answered, why shouldn't I have him on? He's got over 1 million followers on YouTube, and he's brought more audience to my program.
Wow.
Okay, so he's openly said he's calculating it on a on a financial motive. So when you know all of those things and you know how much space there is for you to get things out, you can make your calculation if you've got something valuable you think it's worth saying. There are other shows on that channel where I've seen clips and people haven't even had a chance to say what they want to say. They mute them or they cut them off. He doesn't do that. So even if you take my show as the hardest measure of what you can get through, I think I still got something by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So on
Mm.
balance, the calculation I think was probably right. Uh, um, but but actually who knows? And everyone has to make their own calculation of that. And we all have to be a bit smarter about understanding. We don't need to start praising Piers because he has a pro-Palestinian guest on.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. This is nonsense. We need to be a bit more mature and hear what people have to say. He brings the pro-Israeli guests on, thinking he's doing them a service, but actually, in some ways, he's doing us a service because they're so shameless about their propaganda. They're
Yeah.
such bad liars. It sometimes does a service. He doesn't mean it to be doing that service, but it is actually.
Absolutely. And I mean, you could tell just by looking at the comments of the video he posted of your interview, because
Yeah.
everything from the top to the bottom is just like memeing and joking about Piers, calling him out for his hypocrisy, saying what you mentioned to later become a clip and a meme that, okay, I won't interrupt you. And then like 5 seconds later, he interrupts you.
Yeah.
It's become like a staple whenever people talk about Piers Morgan. And I like the point that you mentioned about why he seems to be doing this, because intention is not just important for us as Muslims in our religion, but it's important for every person on their day-to-day interactions. If you know someone's being nice to you because they're trying to get something out of you, that's not nice, that's manipulative. So it's kind of the same thing with Piers. And I think it's important for us to see it in this way, that the bare minimum is to have both sides on a fair platform, and Piers does not interject. He doesn't take a side. He just asks good questions to both sides, try and pick at their brains and let the audience decide. But that's not what he's doing. The bare minimum is not just having both sides on the show. It's how they're treated on the show, and if they're both given an equal platform on the show to express their views. And it's clear
Yeah.
that he's not done that, not just in your interview, but in the interviews he did with, I'd say, almost every pro-Palestinian guest he's had on, with the exception of Norman Finkelstein. And
Mm.
one could argue that's probably because he's not a Muslim, or maybe because he's been studying this for 40 years. Allahu Alam. But one last thing I wanted to highlight and kind of bring back home, or two things I guess you could say, are his weaponization of those tropes I had mentioned. He talks about on how Islam views certain like filth. And I
Mm.
find that specific segment to be an extreme blunder on his part, because when he read the quote, he talked about um, LGBTQ and feminist filth being injected into Muslim countries.
Into
Now,
Muslim countries.
yeah,
Yeah.
and now the question is, what is being injected? The ideology or the women?
Mm.
Like, are they just sending a
Mm.
bunch of feminist women there, or are they like teaching them the ideology? Obviously, they're teaching them the ideology. But what he tries to do is he tries to take this and flip it and say, you think feminist women are filth. You think the women are filth. And I felt that that was one of the most condescending parts of the interview. So yeah, take it away.
Yes, I think you're right, and I think also my guess, and I don't know this, but my guess, Piers Morgan is not one of these guys that likes identity politics, and therefore, if you asked him whether the identity politics within the West, within liberal secular countries, that uh, whether it's feminist, whether it's LGBT, whether it's race-related politics, whether it's divisive, my guess is that he'd probably say, yeah, it's a divisive form of politics and it's not welcome. And when you look at that, say from the context of feminism, look, you and I know that there are a lot of women in Muslim countries that don't have good rights, not even according to a Sharia standard, not according to a Sharia standard of rights.
Yeah.
But the issue is, does the latest wave of feminism in the West actually help to produce a better situation for women and everyone in society, or does it not? Is it more divisive? Is it more destructive or not? that's a debate and a discussion that requires a bit of maturity and an adult conversation,
Yeah.
without reducing to kind of like calling people names and stuff, and certainly not about people, but talking about the ideas even.
Yeah.
I said on a podcast with Dilly that when I talk to liberals here who are sincere, who are not like out for a political agenda, I say to them, look, um, I recognize that your way of life is one where you believe that the right of the individual to do whatever they like, as long as they don't directly harm another person, is the best way for society to function. Right? I could pick criticisms in that, and I will do when I converse with you. But know this, our way of life from Islam is one that recognizes that the collective good counts for something. That when our Prophet ﷺ gave an analogy of people being on a boat with two decks, an upper deck and a lower deck, and he said, if the people on the lower deck got their water by drilling a hole in the bottom of the deck to get water from the ship, wouldn't the people on the upper deck try to stop them so that the whole ship doesn't sink? Yeah. And so the Sharia protects family values, so the Sharia protects from theft. So the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects us from cursing other people's faiths, etc., etc. Because why? What you might call speech is something that damages the whole of society. What you might call free liberal sexual practices is something that damages the bedrock of society, that is the family. That's the kind of conversation I'd love to have with people. But I guess Piers was on there to just throw mud as he saw it.
Yeah.
And I think one point you make, Brother Rami, is very important. This is not 20 years ago. This generation of Muslims is past caring what people like Piers Morgan think of Islam and Sharia,
Yeah.
right? And I think that actually, he doesn't realize that. He thinks that by throwing this mud, it actually is going to make Muslims turn against me and say, oh, Abdul Wahid, Hizb ut-Tahrir, we shouldn't be saying things like this. But actually, no, they're not. The problem is him and how he's misrepresenting Islam in the same way that people have done for the last 20 years. So, alhamdulillah, we've moved on, I think, and
Yeah.
that's a positive thing.
Absolutely, absolutely, alhamdulillah. And all thanks is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for
Alhamdulillah.
facilitating this between us, facilitating the conversation between you and Piers, for really exposing him or allowing him to expose himself. And it's beautiful. Honestly, it's very beautiful to see the Muslims coming together, uniting on this issue, and just really establishing, even if it's not in a physical presence in the world, even if it's just an online media presence, establishing some kind of firm presence, some kind of firm boundaries that we will not let people overtake or overstep and impede on our beliefs, our rights as Muslims. That is something that has been tremendously beautiful to see. And I thank you and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless and reward you for being one of the
Jazakallah khair.
faces to help facilitate that.
Jazakallah khair. And salam to you. And Jazakallah khair for this opportunity and the good work you guys do as well.
Barakallah fikum. Allah bless you immensely. It's a pleasure having you on. Inshallah, we'll do this again soon. And take care, Sheikh.
Inshallah.
Brother Dilly. So your interview was particularly interesting because you actually have a bit of a history with Piers going back a few years to an interview in 2019. And you yourself are also a journalist. So it was kind of like a clash of heads in a way, more so than it was with the other guests. So fill us in on kind of the pre context going into it.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu Alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters. Rami, Jazakallah khairan for having me on, bro. I just want to say sorry to your viewers because I'm looking a bit rough. My setting is a bit raggo. It's because I'm recovering from a horrible cold. I'm not in the best state. Otherwise, I would have been a much better presentation for your show, Habib. Honestly.
No worries, no worries. May Allah bless you immensely. Honestly, I'm honored to have you. I appreciate it, and inshallah, we'll do this again sometime in person.
No, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah, so basically, me and Piers, we have history. The first time we engaged each other was March 2019. That was just after the Relationship and Sex Education Bill 2019, which basically made it legally mandatory in primary schools, so children up to 4 and 5, to be taught LGBTQ lifestyles.
Wow.
Now, as problematic as that is, to then try implement that in predominantly state schools with a predominantly Muslim demographic, and also without the consultation of the parents. And then that led to parents in Birmingham protesting. So anyway, we ended up at Piers's show, which at the time was Good Morning Britain. It was the primetime morning show in the United Kingdom. And that interview came out, Rami, and the context is important because we're going to be talking about boycotting Piers, should we not boycott Piers and all that. So it all fits into that wider narrative. And that wider narrative is, should Muslims engage hostile media platforms? And the next question is, do we have a choice? So we'll get to that. So this is relevant. So the parents in Birmingham that were protesting back in 2019, they said, Brother Dilly, 5 pillars have been covering the story back to front, from the community's perspective, from a grassroots perspective. We'd like you, because so Piers's show in 2019 contacted the parents steering group. Said, can we have a representative of the parents steering group who are protesting against the LGBTQ education to come onto the show and explain what's going on? They didn't feel confident, and they said, look, we want Brother Dilly to go. But look, when you go, Brother Dilly, please don't make it a debate about homosexuality and the moral objection, because obviously you're not going to have much time. And we just want 3 things explained on our behalf. Number 1, consult us about what you're teaching our children. Number 2, ensure that it is age appropriate. Number 3, make sure lines of communication and the faith of the children are considered when teaching these curriculums. Very 3 basic needs.
Yeah.
The parents did not say to me, go and debate Piers Morgan, go and debate him on this matter, that. They just said, look, this is a very sensitive situation. We're being nationally depicted as bigots. So please just go there and make those 3 points. Consult the parents. The curriculum, whatever it is that you want to teach, has to be age appropriate. So you need to consult us. And number 3, take into consideration the faith-based sensitivities of the children that you're teaching this to. So I went on to the debate. It was quite a mild kind of performance for me in terms of I had to be mindful that I'm not going there as 5 pillars. I'm going there to basically speak on behalf of these parents that have already been maligned and demonized in the press as homophobes and people who belong in the medieval ages and all that. And Piers was on form that day, and it was effectively a 3v1. And one of the things that he said, 2 things actually, that was related to the whole, his approach to the Palestine issue on his new show, is number 1, he made this comment twice about why are these parents protesting as if they're in Islamabad? You've automatically firstly assumed that every single parent there is Pakistani. Number 2, you have linked whatever behavior that you've subjectively observed and applied it to a city in Pakistan. It has heavy racial undertones and it just fits into an Islamic stereotype that because Muslims are protesting, they're angry and therefore they're behaving in a city of a country which already has a bad reputation in terms of terrorism, extremism and stuff like this. Yeah. And I pulled him up on it. I said, why do you keep saying Islamabad? Now, when I repeat that again in the recent debate, he has selective amnesia and he's like, oh, I don't remember. Now, so I know him since 2019. We stayed in touch, not like friendly, let's link up for a coffee type term, but we stayed in basic communication. In 2021, we fell out in Twitter. He blocked me.
Wow.
He was an ardent opponent of the wife of Prince Harry, Meghan. And the backstory was that he first met Meghan and then he met her again at a massive function. And she kind of gave him the cold shoulder, like she wasn't interested in saying hello to Piers. And some said that vendetta started from there. His ego, his narcissistic ego was affected. So I went on Twitter and I said, look, Piers, don't behave like this. If there's truth in this, that's creepy colonial-like vibes you give there. That just because she blanked you at a gathering, you expected some kind of treatment. It gives you very creepy vibes, yeah? You know what I mean? It's weird. Don't do it. And then he blocked me.
Wow.
So that's the backstory. As for now, Palestine and Gaza, Rami, obviously hijab was the first to go on, then Loki, then Abdul Wahid, then Abdul Andalusi, and then myself. Now, some will be asking, oh, brother, but Andrew Tate went on, and Bassam Youssef went on, and Hussam Zomlot went on, and Cenk Uygur went on, and all these guys. Well, there's a stark difference between those guests and these guests,
Mm-hmm.
right? Hijab, myself, Abdul Wahid, Andalusi, and to a much lesser degree, low key, but he is still like broadly part of it. Muslim activism and Islamic dawah scene, right? You wouldn't put Andrew Tate into that category. You wouldn't put Bassam Youssef into that category. Bassam Youssef is a secular stand-up. He was someone who rejoiced at the Rabal Adawiya massacre. He is palatable to the Western non-Muslim audiences because he's a secular stand-up comedian who mocks religion. He's happy to mock the resistance. He's happy to mock things, but very articulately and in a very palatable and eloquent way, able to express the Palestinian cause to an audience who are willing to hear him. You know, so I wouldn't put him into that category either. Hossam Zomlo is the ambassador of Palestine here, of the PA here. He done an interview. He got a very similar treatment. So it's just interesting how he followed that chronology, and each guest has its own story. I mean, if you look at Hijab, you know, that's the 6th most viewed video on his channel.
Yeah.
Now, if you actually, Rami, if you think about it, bro, Hijab can say, or the Muslim community can say, that one of our guys is ranking 6th on his channel. It's got more views than Donald Trump, Kanye West, Khabib, any other big names that you want to mention. I mean, he's had huge actors on, and Hijab's there ranking at 6th, irrespective of how well you think he did or did not do. The point of the matter is he's up there and surpassed huge names, right? And we know Piers did this for the views. He's not dumb.
Yeah.
He did this for the views. He did this for the clicks. He did it for engagement, and he did not hide that. I think a couple of days or a week after the hijab debate, he brought him back on with Rabbi Shmuley.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it purely, and he went back to Bassam Youssef again because of the views. You know, and Piers doesn't hide that.
Yeah.
So I guess that what I'm gonna propose to the viewers and listeners, and perhaps they can discuss in the comment section, is that how is Piers any different to any other non-Muslim media outlet that ultimately their metric for what is a good show or a bad show or a program or content is essentially views, clicks, comments, engagements, and how that can be monetized? I don't see how he's any different. And especially on a UK context, brothers and sisters, you guys know we already have ardent Islamophobic anchors like Andrew Neil, Kay Burley, Nikki Campbell. We have loads of these people, and people have been on their shows. How are they any different? How is the BBC any different, who we pay TV license to? And they give us pro-Zionist, pro-Israel propaganda literally round the bloody clock. Yeah. No one boycotts the BBC or the NBC or their equivalent in the US. So I'm just saying that, where do we draw the line? What makes Piers so? What even makes his type of questioning and the unfair treatment? What makes him any different to any other anchors that employ the same strategy or a version of it? And that is, treat the Muslim guest differently, depict him or her as an extremist, get them to condemn yes and no, and that treatment is never afforded to any other faith group. Do you understand?
Yeah.
How is Piers any different to that? So I guess that's my first kind of opening to today's engagement, bro.
Yeah, I mean, that was amazing and amazingly enlightening as well, and it raises a few questions for myself. I was also wondering why he treated certain guests differently. I thought initially it's a pro-Palestinian stance or certain beliefs within the pro-Palestinian stance, but then I realized that's probably not the case, because Norman Finkelstein is a person who has, some might say, very extreme views in regards to it. He refused.
Well, he's a white Jew.
Exactly.
And khalas, like let's that's another context. And you know, even during my interview, he kept mentioning Finkelstein. And the thing is, Rami, bro, yeah, you know, after someone sits on a platform like that, and Hijab would say the same, and anyone else would say the same, and Abdul Wahid said the same, everyone would say the same. You have so many things in your brain that you want to say, and it depends on what strategy you decide to employ. When you go in there, do you go there to drill in 1, 2, 3 key points and stick at it? Do you go for the drive-by strategy, which is just drop as many sound bites as possible and hope that something sticks and puts him in a corner, which is the strategy I employed? I didn't go for to have a deep conversation because I know the guy wouldn't give me that opportunity. Yeah. I went there for a to and fro and to give it to him a little bit without necessarily having a deep, in-depth conversation about the occupation. It wasn't that. By that time, he's already had 2 months to do that, and he didn't. Right. Now, with regards to what you just mentioned, yeah. So Norman Finkelstein, Yeah, he's a white Jew. He's an American Jew. Of course, you're going to treat him differently. Any other guest, Owen Jones, you know,
Yeah.
now, it can be argued that he was harsh on Jeremy Corbyn, but that's because Jeremy Corbyn is a punchbag in the UK, sadly. Such a nice man, you know, stood for principal causes. Of course, we didn't agree. The Muslims didn't agree with him on many issues, but he's generally very pro-Palestine. He got a very hard time. That's because he bullied him.
Yeah.
But basically, white non-Muslims get a different treatment. They get a completely different treatment. Andrew Tate got a completely different treatment. But Sam Yusuf, though being an Arab and a Muslim, he was. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? That he was a different type of. He doesn't fit that stereotypical bearded Muslim conservative guy. You know, and he's a stand-up comedian. And the Western audiences, they connect with stand-up comedy. It's one of the ways in which they express their views, their opinions, and everything else in between.
Yeah.
So it's the way he specifically treats his Muslim guests. He tried it with hijab, and the first time, and I think hijab set a good precedence and a good tempo. And generally, he's a towering figure, and he's 6'6", 6'7". He has a deep Egyptian voice, and you know, I think he set it off. But what followed after was basically Piers realizing, wow, man, I'm seeing huge growth on my channel.
Yeah.
Right, I'm monetizing this, and you know what? This 10-year contract I think he has with Talk TV or however long the contract is. I'm gonna be getting bonuses and brilliant. We don't know the details, but the point is, he didn't hide it, Rami. He didn't hide it. He's telling us on Twitter, we've hit these views since October the 7th. Well, there's literally a tweet where he goes, we have hit this mark. I think it was the 2 million when they hit 2 million since October the 7th. So he's not even lying to us.
Gosh.
All I'm positing is that how is he any different to anyone else?
Yeah. And from that perspective, there isn't too much of a difference. It's just a little more, I guess you could say, hurtful for some Muslims who had some kind of hope in him, or who looked at.
I
Yeah.
agree with you. Yeah, you remember we spoke about this off camera,
Yeah.
and you're like, and the thing is, I'm going to tell you a story actually. I went over to Kashar Carpets, which is my local carpet shop in my area. And there was a young brother there. He clocked me from the. He was not from my area, but he came to buy carpets. He recognized me from the Piers Morgan, and he said, "Oh, brother, you know, I think Piers is secretly pro-Palestine." And I was like, "Subhanallah." But it was interesting to see his age. He was under 25. I said, Habibi, listen to me. This guy is not pro-Palestine. Yeah, money talks first. That is their religion first. Ultimately, first and foremost, it is the falus. It is the money. Yeah. Ultimately follow that trail and you'll understand where and why they position themselves the way they do. Piers Morgan ultimately doesn't give a rat's about the Palestinians, about our brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
This Khabith, he said to me off camera with a straight face that he does not believe in the right of Palestinians to resist or self-defense. Yet he condemns Israel for illegal occupation. He condemns Israel for what is increasingly becoming a disproportionate response. He condemns Israel for the illegal settlements. He condemns Israel for it, but he does not believe in the Palestinians' right to defend themselves. Yani.
He told you that to your face?
As Allah is my witness, Piers, if you're watching this, you know, and I know, that you said that. And I have it recorded as well.
Wow.
Yeah, I have it recorded, but I'm not going to play it. But you know anyway, and it's a position which you did. I posted it on Twitter, and that tweet got like 2.1 million views. Where I said off camera, you told me this, so he knows that.
Wow.
Piers Morgan does not believe in the right of any Palestinian to pick up a stone and throw it at an Israeli tank before that tank or that bulldozer comes to kill him and his family and dishonor his women. He does not believe in that. And even after I mentioned even under international law, under the UN Geneva Conventions 1949, Protocol 1, or 1982 Resolution 37 and 43, this is enshrined in international law that within international human rights, any occupied people can resist. He goes, no, I don't believe that they should resort to violence. They should use diplomacy to basically, and we didn't have time. And I wasn't surprised. So just in case anyone remotely thinks that this guy is pro-Palestine, he's not pro-Palestine. He's pro-views, pro-money, pro-attention. He's a narcissist. Yeah, he's a narcissist who loves himself. He loves his own voice. And the way he measures success in terms of his deliverables for his employers is views and subscribers. And October the 7th and the events since then of the last 89 days has provided that for him in abundance.
Wow, that's absolutely egregious. In the interest of time, I won't speak too much to that. But what I will say,
we go about 10-15. Carry on.
Okay, amazing. So something that I find extremely egregious is he will always quote, for example, the British government. He'll say the British government has classified Hamas as a terrorist organization. Why won't you? And it's funny because he himself, very clearly on record, disagreed with his own government in terms of the Iraq invasion and the classification of certain photos. And he got fired actually for his classification of photos. So if he doesn't have to agree with his own government, why do we on the classification of something a little more ambiguous, like what a terrorist is, as opposed to whether a photo is real or not? And then when you look at, for example, international law, which you mentioned, and you cited very specific conventions that articulate our case for us very well, that these are protected persons who have a right to resist. And in the 80s, there was, I believe, either Security Council meeting or a General Assembly in the UN, and they reaffirmed the Palestinians.
1982.
1982, exactly, yeah, Jazakallah khair. And they reaffirmed the Palestinians' right to specifically armed struggle.
Article 37, Article 43, that's the one.
So it's like if we have to basically obey the British government because they came to the certain conclusion, why don't you and the British government have to comply with international laws at on the very least? Just accept the fact that they have a right to resist. I find that very detestable that he would say that, and I hope that the Muslims wake up to that, and I applaud you for sharing that with us. But I do want to ask one question, going back to something you had mentioned before, the whole Islamabad thing, because I remember on the actual show he had mentioned that he will look into it and then give like a full response. Did that ever happen?
No, he didn't. No, he didn't get. But and obviously he was occupied because the very next day, a High Court judge in London found him to be in knowledge of, whilst being an editor of Daily Mirror, of illegal phone hacking. So I think his priorities was, getting back to Dilly Hussain about a statement he said in 2019 wasn't there. He was dealing with a High Court judge.
Wow.
No, did you follow that? Did you follow that? At the very next day?
I had no idea.
The very next day, so my interview with him was Thursday. The next day, Yom al-Jum'ah, around about 11:30, a High Court judge in London found Piers Morgan to be fully aware, whilst being the editor of the Daily Mirror, of having knowledge of journalists who were working under him and answerable to him, to be knowing that they were involved in phone hacking, which is illegal, and there could be criminal prosecutions.
Wow.
So I mean, all public knowledge. That's why Piers has been very quiet of late. He's got Douglas Murray covering for him this week, the Khabith Shaitan. So, Piers no longer really can claim any kind of journalistic credibility. I know he denies the High Court judge's findings, but the point of the matter is, go and challenge them, and there could be criminal proceedings. The point of the matter is, whilst he was the editor of one of the largest tabloid newspapers in the UK, and the Daily Mirror is the oldest tabloid in the Western world, whilst he was the editor there were journalists working under him that were engaging in illegal phone hacking. That's a criminal offence. So that shows two things. He was either complicit or he was unforgivably negligent. So for him to then look at the qadr of Allah, look at the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he had Abdul Wahid on, a man who's aging, a doctor for 25, 28 years, who has served his community, not a single blip in his record. And he tried getting this man fired. 2 weeks later, here you are now being found caught to be, we can't say guilty, we can't use the word guilty because legally that would mean it's a criminal case, but it's not, it's a civil case. But the point of the matter is the High Court judge found that Piers Morgan, whilst being the editor, knew that his journalists were literally up to criminal activity. So he needs to now either counter that, and there could be proceedings against him. So given that, I don't think he has any grounds to be talking to anyone about any kind of professional credibility. And just on two things, Rami, it's important, but it's related. He kept mentioning this whole kind of like, Iraq and all that stuff. Listen, the reason, I remember this, Habib, during the interview, you want to say things, but your brain's crammed. Yeah. Do you understand, Rami? And because I went with the Uzi strategy, I couldn't allow myself to go too deep into one point. I had to basically spray him and see what stuck. So when he kept saying Iraq, the truth of the matter is, Piers, it didn't meet your threshold of what qualifies as a justified war. You didn't oppose Iraq war because it was a Muslim country. It was a Muslim sovereign country. You opposed the Iraq war because it didn't meet your threshold of what qualifies as a justified war. Had it, i.e. Iraq had WMD, Saddam was harboring Al-Qaeda fighters, you would have backed that war. So that's utter BS. The second thing about Islamabad, he fully well knew what he said. I don't need to have Husn al-Dhan for him. He hasn't got back to me, but loads of people on Twitter have posted the clip anyway.
Yeah.
But he hasn't responded to it.
Yeah, and I don't think he ever will. Even if the judge didn't rule against him the next day, I don't think he planned on doing it. It was just a quick
Yeah.
scapegoat. He knows he's really
Yeah.
not going to push back on it too much. But khair inshallah. It's out there, we know. Alhamdulillah. It's beautiful, you know, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
Beautiful, bro.
turned the
Look at
plot
it.
against him in that way.
Alhamdulillah, you know Abdul Wahid, I say this about him because, you know, irrespective of the organization that he's affiliated with or anything like that, or whether you disagree with him, whatever it is, he's a lovely man. You've spoken to him. And there's a reason why brothers and leaders from different groups and movements respect Abdul Wahid a lot, because he's a very lovely, genuine man, and a man who's had a very, you know, a strong upbringing and you know, gone through the education system, private education, has been a GP, he's a pillar of his community. And for him to have given that treatment by Piers and to still hold it down and not kind of like, you know, succumb to and bring himself down to Piers's level. You know, it was outright bullying, but Allah allowed his mask to fall, because that's when he said the whole oppressed women line.
Yeah.
That's when the whole boycott thing started.
Yeah.
The whole boycott movement for Piers began at the back of Abdul Wahid's interview, because the Muslims saw three things. Here is Piers, who's invited a doctor, you know, a respectable profession in society. You respect a doctor because of, you know, the educational sacrifices they've given, the time, and literally saving lives and helping people. Yeah. They're pillars of the community and society. In Britain respects doctors, right? You bring him on. You can see he's an aging man, a softly spoken man. You've brought him on. You're trying to get this man fired, basically. You're trying to incriminate him, basically. You're basically trying to get him literally arrested after he leaves the studio. You're trying to get him to incriminate him. Number two, you started speaking about Sharia. Like, why are you talking about Sharia? Why are you talking about Sharia? How are you talking about the religious law of 1/5 of humanity? When did this happen? Number three, the whole Muslim women are oppressed. That was an instinctive response. For those who, an instinctive response is what your heart sometimes speaks before your mind thinks. Sah, Rami?
Yeah, they call it like a Freudian slip.
Yes, that's what it was. And Islamabad was the same thing.
Wow.
The truth is, I'm not saying Piers would, but these words come out when they can't say you effing muzzy packy. That's the truth. That's the truth. What many of them would want to say. That's what many of them would want to say. But the instinctive response is Islamabad, because they want to be oppressed. Yeah, that's it. It's just these snidey, very lowly comments. Really writing off 1 billion Muslim women. And I gave him the opportunity to apologize. He did not.
Yeah.
Twice. He did not. He could have destroyed me. He could have been like, yeah, I apologize. I'm sorry. He could have looked at the camera and said, Muslim women, I'm so sorry. Imagine how viral that clip would have gone in his defense. He could have milked that till the Eid, to be honest. Yeah. But he didn't. That's because he stuck by his horrible, bigoted guns. He had the opportunity to apologize for talking about Sharia, because he said during Abdul Wahid's engagement, he said, I know about Sharia. I know Sharia. Said it twice.
Yeah.
What do you know about Sharia? Actually, one of the things I wanted to ask him was, can you just name me 3 sources of what Sharia law is made from, please? Like, can you just tell me what is this is like cursory 101, a 10-year-old Muslim kid could tell you any part of the world. What's the 3 sources of Sharia law? There's no way he's saying to me Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma Sahaba. There's no way he's saying it. And the man sits there and he told us. So these are little one-liner punches that I had to give him on screen just to check and let everyone to go make the content, let them make the sound bites and the little clips to remind him that he was asked that the man has no qualifications in Sharia.
Yeah.
He did not apologize to Muslim women. You know, he wanted me to condemn Hamas for according to the Israeli reports, killing 1,200 people. But he wanted me to condemn that as an act of terrorism, but he would not condemn the death of thousands of Palestinian children without heads and limbs. When I asked him to give me one name of a child so I could mourn and condemn, because we believe all babies are Muslim, all children are Muslim. They're going to be in Jannah, in paradise with Ibrahim alayhi salam. So name me the Israeli child, because that's a Muslim child there for us, from our perspective. Yeah. All babies are Muslim. Let me condemn and mourn with you. He couldn't name me a single child. Why? You are like Mark Regev didn't even know the full number of civilian deaths according to Israel. So I had to drop all of these jabs, Rami.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole thing about, can you imagine this guy? He's trying to say to me, you call it resistance, so therefore it means supporting terrorism. I goes, when did you become the CPS? The CPS is the Crown. CPS basically for the North American viewers is Crown Prosecution Service. It's basically like the state attorney equivalent, right? It's the guys who do the prosecution. When did you become the CPS? When did you become the judge to say that referring to whatever as resistance equates to terrorism? You're a journalist. You're not the law enforcement agency. So I had to, these are little jabs I had to give him and I had to remind him, you're an actual waste man.
Yeah.
That's the truth. On paper, you are not a journalist. You're an anchor, you're a presenter, and yeah, you have your own very kind of memorable style of engaging and whatever it is, and some people like it, some people don't, and you've interviewed some of the biggest names in the world. But in the eyes of most Muslims, you are a waste man. You are an Islamophobic, bigoted individual who is driven ultimately by monetary gain, your own self-advancement, and that's who Piers is. And he knows I have this opinion of him anyway. So like, it's not breaking news. And I'm sure I'll meet him again either on camera or off camera. But the point of my is people shouldn't, think to himself that this guy's pro-Palestine. We want everyone to be guided to Islam. But on the specific issue of his coverage of the pro-Palestine issue has been purely for personal gain and for the benefit of his channel and his employers, Talk TV, News UK, which is ultimately, I think, falls under the Murdoch umbrella, who's an ardent Zionist, an outright warmonger, and has used his vast media links and ownerships to wage war against Islamo Muslims, whether it's domestically here or literally militarily in the world. And Piers Morgan falls under that Murdoch umbrella. So no one should be fooled by that. I guess the whole thing about boycott, Rami, and people are right to question this, there was some confusion because Roshan Saleh, who is the editor of Five Pillars, he was very pro-boycott. And because he was very loud about it on Twitter and stuff, and he spoke about it a lot, people conflated that with thinking that was the official editorial stance of Five Pillars.
I see.
Problem number one. Problem number two, when Piers Morgan Uncensored posted their kind of poster for my episode, they had the hashtag boycott Piers Morgan, because that was going to be the trending hashtag for that episode.
Wow.
So when I retweeted that, people were a bit confused, understandably, and I did apologize to people that if you got confused, I'm sorry, but I personally have never called for a boycott of Piers Morgan, not once. Yeah. Roshan has. People got confused, thinking, hold on, are Five Pillars telling people to boycott? And then the editor goes on, what the hell's going on? Is this double standards? Or I just even saw one or two brothers, they were like, yeah, boycott them after I've been on, yeah? After I've been on, you boycott. And I will lie, uqsam billah, that was not the case. I've never ever called for a boycott. I never ever called for a boycott because I don't believe in the boycott. I don't believe in boycotting hostile media outlets. I've been doing it since 2014-15. So has Roshan. We've been on BBC Newsnight. We've been on Andrew Neil's Daily Politics. I've been on Sunday Morning Live Show. We've been on all the primetime shows, me and Roshan, since 2011, 12, 13, 14. And we have never, ever, personally or even as Five Pillars, have said that, do not go onto this platform. We're boycotting it outright, because boycotting Piers Morgan's show is not like boycotting Israeli dates.
Yeah,
you're not going to get that level of unity and coordination. In fact, one of the first groups of people that will come and criticize us will be Palestinians themselves. Will say, "Who the hell are you guys to say boycott Piers Morgan?" At the end of the day, if we want more Muslims, more Palestinian voices on a big platform, that shouldn't be a decision made by you guys, to be honest. And they'd have some weight to that. But the point I'm saying is, if you want to boycott Piers' show, I would never discourage you. In the same way that we should never discourage anyone boycotting something for the sake of Allah. I would never discourage it. However, that said, I am of the position, and this has been my position since I've been a journalist, since I was part of Five Pillars in 2013, is that the most competent people should engage in these hostile environments. We do not have a Islamic civilization. We do not have Islamic states or polities that genuine or meaningful that would help voices like yourself, myself, all the brothers that are on the show, and will give us millions and millions of dollars to amplify our voices. We don't have that. We don't. Al Jazeera's not like that. TRT's not like that. Even though they're affiliated to Qatar and Turkey, they're not like that. Meaning, we have to deal with the hand that's been dealt out to us.
Yeah.
And the hand that's dealt out to us is coming onto these hostile shows where you're going to get a completely different treatment to your other non-Muslim peers. You're probably going to get bullied. You're going to get pushed into a corner. You're going to be given condemned yes or no questions. And your sole purpose there, or at least their objective, is to depict you in a particular way and to further polarize opinion, public opinion, and to depict Muslims and Islam in a bad light. But the counter to that is that what do we do then if we boycott and then we start having murtadeen, ex-Muslims, secular liberals, deformists going on? I bet you will be here on this show or my show talking about why do they call these people to talk about Islam or Muslims? Why do they ever go? But it's just a circular thing. So my position is that if you want to boycott, alhamdulillah, may Allah bless you. But I've never been in the position. The most competent people should go onto these shows and deal with it. And you're not always going to come out winning. You're not always going to come out victorious. Allah even tells us in the Quran that sometimes you will win, sometimes you will lose, as in terms of inflicting victory and defeat. It goes both ways. The point is, if you go there with sincerity, after making shura, after making istikhara, after outweighing the harms and benefits of going on, and how it could be strategically leveraged after you've been on the show in terms of creating content and starting it, all these things factored in, I just think the best people should go forth to do these things, or the most competent people should go forth. And sometimes it's not even the best or competent. Sometimes it's just the most principled person, someone who won't throw the Palestinians under the bus.
Yeah.
Someone who won't basically, talk from the comforts of their home whilst a genocide is taking place.
Yeah.
Do you understand? And they're taking positions which ultimately doesn't compromise Islam, the sentiments of the community, or our brothers and sisters in occupied Palestine. So if we start boycotting and literally there's no Muslim guests, conservative, orthodox, normative, mainstream Muslims on these shows, bro, we'll be complaining about being misrepresented by murtadeen and liberals and secularists, and people don't actually, represent the mainstream views and the grassroots of the Muslim community. So, yeah, that's basically my position on the whole boycott. But there was a genuine confusion from our part. And that was due to the fact that people were a bit confused as to is Five Pillars calling for a boycott, or if they are, why is Dilly going on? But all it was is that Roshan held a position which he was very loud about, and people just conflated that to be the official position of Five Pillars, and it wasn't. But khair, alhamdulillah. Should Muslims still go on? I guess is the next question. Should Muslims still go on? I think they would. How about this, Rami? Let me ask you this, bro. Yeah? Imagine we boycotted Piers Morgan's show. Yeah? Let's say like du'at, activists, like pro-Palestine figures started boycotting it.
Yeah.
And then you see Khabib on the show next month. Someone that the ummah loves. Someone who I know follows and watches these things. Or that we see another Bassam Youssef episode. And another bit. The fact of the matter is we can't boycott a show like that, because boycotting Israeli dates and food produce from stolen land is something that you can galvanize the entire ummah and tell them you can't buy their food because it's haram for us to consume. They're growing on stolen land. That can't be applied. That level of solidarity and consistency on a campaign. Rami, you know that man don't eat Israeli dates. Everyone knows that, right? Everyone knows. It doesn't matter if you're Arab, Turk, Asian, African, black, white, yellow. You know that you don't consume Israeli dates. It's a thing. Everyone knows that. We don't take their olives. We don't take any of their food produce.
Yeah.
That's not the same as boycotting Piers. And if you're going to boycott Piers, then what else are you going to boycott? What else are you going to boycott? Who else are you going to boycott? That's not profiteering from the death and destruction and the plight of our people.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And I think it's important to be principled. And one of the biggest shortcomings of Piers is failing to remain principled in the whole thing. He will always, cite the value of innocent lives and so on and so forth, and cite kind of Hamas as a terrorist organization. But when but when Israel does the same exact thing tenfold or 100-fold over the last few decades, he fails to be consistent with that. So I think it is very important for us to be consistent in this sense.
But we now know that, isn't it? So now those who have seen my tweet, who will see this episode and would have seen other episodes that I did with, I've spoken about it since. Piers Morgan, so I look straight to the camera. Piers Morgan does not believe in the right of Palestinians to resist or self-defend against Israeli aggression.
Yeah. Can I just say again that is extremely filthy, because he said something along the lines of that he understands the plight of the Palestinians, or some kind of supportive statement like that on camera.
No, he understands their plight, but he doesn't understand. He doesn't believe in their right to respond to that plight. He believes diplomacy is for Palestinians until they get whatever two-state leftover crumbs that the Israelis will throw at them, which we now know that they're not even interested and never have been interested in.
Yeah.
He does not believe in their right. He does not believe, I know this is a toy lemon I've got, but he does not believe in the right of a Palestinian child or an adult to pick up a rock knowing that a bulldozer is going to knock his family home down, or knowing that that settler armed family has been occupying his grandmother's home for the last 70 years and all he wants is a right to return, to throw a rock at a tank, that he believes that to be nearing an act of terrorism, because he equates resistance with terrorism. He equates resistance with terrorism. And that's because Piers Morgan does not believe in Palestinians' right to self-defense.
Oh, wow. No, I mean,
Piers, sue me. Piers, sue me if you think that I've misrepresented you. And you know I haven't.
I mean, wow, subhanAllah. First and foremost, I believe that's inherently racist of him, because I don't think he would use the same. And actually, Muhammad Hijab kind of put this to him with the whole I think it was the terrorist groupman. Like, where is he from again? Is he Irish?
It's the IRA.
Yeah,
but
the IRA.
Yeah, it's the IRA. So like, you know, I even gave him the example. Okay, so Hijab gave a closer example, like that's more contemporary. But I gave him an example. I was like, look, during Nazi occupation of Europe, you know, Britain resisted, right? You know, Germany, a Nazi state, was now invading countries outside of its borders. So it's a foreign occupier. He goes, but it was the Nazis. I was like, well, the Palestinians will say they're armed Israeli settlers. What's the difference?
Yeah.
And he didn't have nothing to say to that.
Yeah.
So literally, Piers is of that, you know, literally one rule for us, and us being white, European, non-Muslims, Zionists, and a completely different rule for brown Muslims. And I have no hesitancy to say that. That is his modus operandi when he deals with Muslims, unless it happens to be a happy, jolly story that's not political. Then he might be nice to you if he has someone like a Muslim celebrity or a cook on or something like that. But otherwise, if he's going to engage you on these topics, that's the treatment that you're going to get, and that's the kind of paradigm that you're going to have to fit into when you go onto his show. I saw someone tweet. The brother's quite well known. I'm not going to mention his name. Well known in terms of his videos get quite a few views, but I'm not going to mention him. He said that people keep going onto Pierce's show thinking that they are going to be the ones who knock him out, but they don't understand that he is the ring. Well, of course he's the ring. It's his show. Of course, that's not breaking news or rocket science. If I come onto the Three Muslims or your show, I know it's your show. You guys have certain advantages as being the hosts, right? Same with me on my podcast. When people come onto my show, they know that I'm in a position of strength because I'm the one that's asking questions. Then it's my show, it's my platform, it's my studio. I can edit it how I want if I wish, and all that kind of stuff. So similarly with Piers, you know, it comes with that and even more. And also the live episode that went out, they cut 13 minutes, 14 minutes. Yeah.
Wow.
I had to text his producer, Bharati Naik, and I said, listen, the live episode that just went out, it had the most weirdest, unnatural cuts, and you've literally taken all my key bits out. And they said, we're going to release the full thing in about half an hour, 40 minutes, which you did. And I realized the full thing was 24 minutes. And what they put out was like 11 minutes. So they cut out about 13 minutes.
Wow.
So that's not really uncensored, is it?
Not at all. So just to be clear, is that still not out to this day, or did they eventually release the full?
They did. They eventually released the full thing on the night, about half an hour, 45 minutes later, or an hour later. But the point is, the full 1 hour live show that went out. So what it is, they pre-record it and then they release it as a live show, right? And they cut out 13 minutes of a 24-minute exchange, which is like that's bonkers. Not even like 20%. It's like more than half.
Absolutely. And I think it's very clear, and I've been very decisive, but it's very clear his show is not uncensored in any way, shape, or form. Whenever you have someone who's a little too vocally Muslim, as we've discussed, proclaim something that he personally disagrees with, he won't even let them say it, frankly. And that's I noticed that's when he cuts people off, when they even begin down a line of thinking that he doesn't even want to try and fathom. He just cuts them off before he gets there, because he knows the evidence is going to side against him, and he's going to be made, to look stupid or inconsistent, and that's obviously not what he wants on his show. So that's why I think he cuts Muslims off way more than any other guest.
Yeah. So I done my maths. I basically looked at all that. Remember this. I have to be fair in the sense that I have to look at all the Muslim guests he's had on
Yeah.
And there's a bit of maths I had to do. It's quite long and tedious, but yeah, it's around about 19.7 to 21 seconds, right? Now that may seem a lot, but if you put all the time together, it's not. When you're asking someone a complex question,
Yeah.
15 seconds, 20 seconds to respond is not. Whereas he gives Ben Shapiro, he gives Douglas Murray, he gives all his bloodthirsty, warmongering Zionist buddies unadulterated time to speak, 2, 3, 4 minutes on the trot, uninterrupted. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And we get 15, 20 seconds to get something, and sometimes, many cases, less than that. If
Yeah.
you were to take my episode, Andalusi's episode, Hijab's first episode, Abdul Wahid's one definitely, and to a lesser degree low key, maybe Ibn Hussam Zomlot. If you add those together, he's practically he's interrupting every 12 seconds, every 13 seconds. But if you add all the other Muslim guests on, Andrew Tate, Bassam Youssef, and I was to be fair to him, it worked out about 20 to 21 seconds. But if you were to look at just the 5 British Muslims that he had on, it's about 15 seconds.
Wow. That's horrible.
You know what I mean? And that is, it's
especially
horrible, bro.
especially as an interviewer, because like I've been interviewing people for years now, and I find that to really best honor and get the most out of the guests, you have to let them speak.
We know he can do it. He
Yeah,
does it.
yeah,
He does it to Fiqh Stein. He does it to Bassam Youssef. He does it to those guests who he likes, who
Yeah.
he doesn't have an internal deep issue with. He just simply can't allow himself to have a reasoned and well-tempered conversation. For
Yeah.
some reason, when he has a certain demographic of guests on, it's not happening.
Yeah, it's very clear that he interviews them and interrogates you guys. That's
Completely.
kind of been the standard.
Basically.
Yeah.
Basically.
And alhamdulillah, like I mentioned, it's decisive. This whole interview has been extremely eye-opening. I hope that inshallah more comes out just to kind of work against him. I know he's going to keep speaking against himself, and he's going to have those slips of the tongue. But I'm glad that alhamdulillah, you were able to inform us of all these things that happen in the back end that we don't know about, because all these things are leveraged over time in one way, shape, or form. And if the general public doesn't know about it, sometimes on the forefront, on the surface, is confusing of what's going on behind the scenes. And I guess what we saw was just the tip of the iceberg that they selectively wanted us to see. And everything you told us is kind of everything underlying that. So barakallah fikum, Allah bless you immensely for it. And for the work that you do. I'm very excited to visit you one day in the UK, hopefully soon, inshallah. That we can make it happen.
Inshallah.
Again, may Allah bless you and reward you. This has been an eye-opening interview.
Always an honor to be on, Rami. Take care, my dear brother.
Inshallah. You as well.